Hi, and welcome
Hi, Karan.
to the journalism section of our event in Grief in Solidarity. Thank
Thank
you,
you so much,
Anumeha,
Sarah.
for joining us.
Yeah.
Anumeha is an amazing journalist from India, and I would love for you to introduce yourself a bit, where you're based, where you've done your reporting, and a bit of a history.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sarah. I am I'm a print reporter. I live in Delhi right now, and I'm from Rajasthan, which is in Western India. I primarily focus on working class issues, both in rural and urban areas. I do relate more to having a labor beat, though as such, it's not really a beat any longer in most publications here, because usually it's confined to a ministry. At the most, if some newspapers have a labor correspondent, it will be like, oh, you go to the ministry and you track what's going on in the ministry. But how are various laws, policies affecting working class people in India? And that usually also corresponds in India with caste. So, trying to examine those kind of issues and impact of policies primarily in rural India or in peri-urban areas of India. That's what I do. And so social policy, labor policy. One of my recent focuses has been also the impact of technology in these areas, because a lot of governance is shifting to tech focused solutions in a lot of these things. So.
Right. And so I have this question as, journalist to journalist. How has journalism itself been affected? How has the pandemic and the lockdown, because this is what we're going to be talking about today. How has your reporting, or have you experienced any difficulties in doing your reports?
So when the lockdown started last year, when the first, I mean, when initially around March 2020, when Indian government first started acknowledging and responding to the spread of coronavirus in India, I think for a couple of days, everybody was unsure because there was an absolute curfew on how much can one go out or step out and what kind of protections are required. I was not able to drive around on my own. So then I was trying to go around with a food truck, that I would take a ride with them, and then when they would be distributing meals, and that's the time I was trying to interview people on how it was. What had happened was, the our Prime Minister initially did a 1 day sort of rehearsal of a curfew. Then on March 21st and then 24th, they announced that there will be a lockdown, and it was initially for 21 days, and then it was extended for 6 weeks and almost for 3 months later. And it was all very sudden. Most people just had no time for preparation. Most workers in India work without any contracts, without any social security. So it was just massive. It seemed to us that our government had responded a lot in line with how it was seeing other countries respond, especially in the West, maybe in Europe, that that, oh, Italy and so on were in a very bad state at that point, that we need a lockdown, and they just did it almost without thinking almost of how would it really impact people across the range of, across range of incomes, across range of the kind of work people do. So it was just very haphazard. There was very little information. The Home Ministry, which is in charge of law and order, was just passing some orders from time to time. And like you were discussing earlier, there was very little information even shared clearly or transparently. So it was really, actually, it was just havoc. And initially, sure how to go about it. And then slowly, once I figured this, that okay, there are some food trucks going on, one can go with them and then access some places. And the problem for me was I'm not very confident driving myself. So yeah, that's why I was taking a ride with them and then trying to go wherever they were going. But it was good because it was allowing me to go to very diverse areas. And some reports I also did try to do initially on the phone, which was they had shut off trains. So say Rajasthan, there's one district, Bhilwara. I tried to do a report largely based on phone interviews with workers there. Then later on, when they opened the lockdown or relaxed the lockdown bit, then one could take trains also and travel, and even the metro, the public transport here was restarted 3-4 months later, and then one could go about more easily. I can stop here if
No,
or
thank you, because you pointed out something really important, which is that, like the government announced a lockdown based on what the West was doing, but things were already very different here. And that's what you've written extensively about as well. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit about what your reporting, like reviewed and why that was important to tell, the story.
So some of the first measures by the government came when there were much fewer cases here, almost like say 500 to 1,000 cases here, but they had put the country under a national lockdown. So, like I said, they said that they are trying to prioritize lives, but it put people here in a weird situation of lives versus livelihoods, especially because somehow we have structures here which, it seemed almost as if these are natural or created by some larger force or something. But no, our society has created these weird structures where two-thirds of the workers have no contracts or no written proof of who even their employers are, or 90% workers here have no social security. So they had just suddenly left people in the lurch, and a lot of work is done in cities on the basis of what now people keep saying migrant labor, migrant labor. Jan Bremen has described it as footloose labor. That you bring in very impoverished people from villages here. You have made your practices are such and your market practices are such that you have made farming untenable for people to really be able to survive on throughout the year, which is also something we are right now seeing in the farmers' protest. So neither do they have enough land or sustainable produce back home to be able to live off it the whole year. And when they come to the city, they're almost deliberately kept in positions where you neither have any housing rights, you're not given any equal no, any support in whether it is transport, whether it is housing, whether it is education or healthcare for their children. In the case of construction workers, they are made to live in very unsanitary conditions on the construction site, or you make workers live in these very makeshift arrangement in slums. Maybe it's common across the region. So you deliberately almost keep people in a very precarious condition because that allows you to exploit them and allows you to make them work without even paying them minimum wages. And despite all of this, Indian government has had a huge project of one of the world's largest biometric database, that we will take the fingerprints of everybody in India and put it in a database. You have collected so much information about citizens, and especially coercing the poorest people that you'll not be able to access grains or healthcare unless you enroll in our biometric database. On one hand, you want this absolute information from the poorest residents of your country. On the other hand, you just throw your hands up saying you will never use that information to ever place it down to then who is accountable when that person comes to work here, what is the employer's responsibility, to even insist on is there even a pay slip given to a worker. So you have deliberately kept, I think, that whether it is governments, whether employers, you deliberately maintain a system of work in such a fashion. And then when you just respond very quickly to, oh, we think internationally this is being done, so this is what we should do. And India also has extremely poor statistics on both public health and on nutrition. So for people, it became just an attack from all directions, where you're compromising, you are disrupting their livelihood. You have just suddenly left them without any, they did not have a proper place to live here. Then you said, no, we are stopping the trains overnight, and you neither have a place to live here nor can you go back. You they Some social activists approached the Supreme Court of India, saying you need to ensure that employers pay these wages and so on. And the court, literally the Supreme Court of India said, no, we know that government has submitted these documents. They are being given some cooked meals. So why do they need money? Really, like such callous kind of remarks from the highest government institutions here, that they, most workers were basically, when the lockdown happened, I can even, there's a group called the Stranded Workers Action Network. They even had some data from then about how among 10,000 workers whom they had spoken to, 33% had got any wage, 15% had got partial wages, 92% were not paid anything at all for the days that the government suddenly shut down everything. Then government also announced very meager social security, like 5 kilos grains and some $10 a $10 stipend will reach some people in their bank accounts, which is linked to these biometrics. So it was nothing, right? Like you're paying people like $10 to survive in 3 months. Another thing that happened was that a lot of workers live in conditions where, say, in Gujarat, which is one of the most industrialized places in India, there are people here who live in, like 20 workers live in one small room or, accommodation. Why do they live like that? Because 10 of them, because there are 24-hour work shifts. 10 of them go to work in the day, 10 of them go to work in the night shift, and that's how they manage to accommodate themselves in such a constrained and such a difficult place to live in. When you did this lockdown, people who were living in this condition, who were just packed in these in this fashion, in a way which you don't have facilities to toilets or even to like sleep together comfortably, like for there to be space for 20 people, and including there were many videos and testimonies by these workers, which included minor workers, children as workers, who were just packed in these places and had been left by the government. And no, like, just stay packed here, you can't come out. If you step out, a policeman will beat you because you're violating the lockdown. You cannot go home because we've arbitrarily, without discussing or making it transparent, just stopped all the trains, and we are giving you some meager food grain help. There was no accountability traced to workers, employers. Or, I mean, government passed one order that, yeah, landlords should forego rent and wages should not be deducted, but there was very, very little enforcement of this. In fact, when the Supreme Court says, when you're being given some, charity meal, why do you need money? If this is your attitude and you just systematically undermine people's rights on basic things,
This
so
sounds like
it was just
such a, this like sounds like such a perfect case of just abandonment, just the power to abandon people. And it's reminding me of what happened in Pakistan when the lockdown began, which is that the government took that opportunity to implement or push through neoliberal reforms in the health sector. We know that happened with the farmers in India. Did that happen with the health sector workers in India as well?
So there are reports of extreme, just recently there was a report, 2 days back, there was a report that in one of the major hospitals here, one of the biggest public hospitals here, they had asked 30 doctors who had been hired 2 weeks earlier to no longer come to work. That they are, you think this is happening only to very low income workers. This is also now actually coming to this end of whatever higher end blue collar workers whom you associate with more formal work contracts or work terms, where they are also being treated in this fashion, in whether it is their own personal safety, whether their how their employers are treating them, and so on. So yeah, there was a report like that here. But what our government has tried to push towards is, they are trying to push towards a health ID. The way I mentioned, that database of biometrics called Aadhaar, which has become it was told to us that this is a voluntary facility, it will help in your identification, but it was tied to people's food subsidies, that you will not get your 5 kilo grain, which helps your family survive, unless you enroll in this database. So similarly, now what the government is trying to do is, the primary big change it is offered to people is that, and Prime Minister Modi referred to it in January in his speech to the World Economic Forum as well, that India will be coming up with a new health ID, an electronic health ID, which will tag together all your electronic health information all together. So, what they want to do is, they want to commercialize this data, that this data, because India has more than 1 billion people, the data footprints of 1 billion people is of value to tech firms internationally, to various, I think there is a market for data now. And so people basically are being treated as just, for being harvested, their data to be harvested from them. Overall, India spends about 1% of its GDP on health. And even after last year's, what we saw in the pandemic last year, in this February, in our new budget to our health, the spending on health comes to less than 1%. And they increased it by 0.3% of the GDP. So despite seeing the havoc last year, they did that kind of they made that decision, only like tom-tomming this one health ID that's going to come, and everything is going to become like, you can access everything on a desktop, everything is going to be very mobile savvy, this, that. But if you are not prioritizing public health, if you treat it as yeah, like you're saying, that that if they just want to liberalize it or privatize the sector, you don't want to do the basic foundation of building public health or building village level and primary and preventative health measures, and only offer some, like, some cosmetic health ID and so on, that too with a bad intention, where you will take people's data where they don't even have a choice to refuse that. So
Right.
it's pretty terrible. Yeah, our government has
I'm
made us just as these. I don't know if you're familiar with McKinsey work. She refers to this as a new kind of capitalism. She refers to it as that how we are like this kind of vector capitalism. That uh, now it's sometimes not all work is even the kind of traditional work of working in factories or now being made to work for our data, which also is, it's definitely very visible here in
and
the kind
data
of
to be
measures.
sold for profit.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. That they see a market
I,
in it. Obviously they'll say, no, it'll be consent based and so on. But when you're saying I consent, you have no idea what have you consented to. Still most of the our country is not literate. They don't even have access to smartphones. People cannot read English, and you're making people sign up for things like this. Even our current vaccination thing, it's been written about in the Wired day too, that it's just scandalous even how our government has gone about distributing vaccines or providing access to vaccine this through this very centralized one website, where there is just there's a fight between like you are really struggling for multiple days to even those who have internet access or know English have to go on this one website, which is just, it's only in English. It's this very fairly complicated website if you're not very used to even I think if you're a working class person and you use Facebook and so on, you may find it very difficult to access this website. And then what some activists have pointed out is that the moment you will get this vaccine, government is already linking your data to the universal health ID they want to create. So you'll go your vaccine and you're just, this new data point has been created for you, whether you wanted to do that or not. So just like trying to instead of seeing what can be done for people, to just extract from them and look, I think
the
act in a very
crisis turns into
short-sighted
an
manner is what we keep
opportunity.
saying. Yeah, absolutely.
And so here is where I want to talk about how workers have resisted and moments of solidarity and protest. And you mentioned that you've interviewed several workers around these subjects and written about it. I was wondering if you'd like to speak about it a bit.
So, Sarah, last year around June, July, I started trying to also track around the time they restarted trains, and some workplaces. So around June, July is when the government started allowing some movement again. They restarted the trains, and some workplaces were allowed to function again. And that's around the time that I also wanted to. I started doing a series of interviews with workers, in which what I was curious about was that I felt that a lot of the depiction is also just very, oh, these poor people, and everybody, just very bits and pieces of somebody in a moment of crisis whom we don't really understand how they work and so on, or how are they responding, except that, oh, this person needs some charity and oh, they got it or didn't get it. I felt like it was just this very one dimensional, very victimized sort of depiction of workers and the poor as well. So while at the same time, what had happened was, one of the reasons why Indian government had to restart trains was that in a lot of the places, workers who are not organized, they are not a part of a union, because the nature of work is very temporary, or it's informal, or they're not really allowed to be formally part of an association. So they were not formally organized, but they had informally organized or had gathered in places. For example, I was mentioning in Gujarat, which is one of, it saw a series of strikes and violent demonstrations by thousands of workers. In several places, workers overpowered the police. They went on rampage, demanding that they be allowed to go back home. And like I said, it was also linked to, it was being depicted in the media as that, oh, why are they being irresponsible? Why don't they understand it's for their own good? Government is not letting them go because it's for their own public health or safety or so on. But you're not understanding the conditions people are living in. It's summer, it's hot, people don't have a place to live in comfortably, you don't even have access to toilets. Like I said, 20 people people are living, share the room as per shifts, and now you've suddenly packed them all together. And also that most people, when they go to work in cities, have no they feel they are only being a lot of workers share views like this, that we know an employer only bothers about the work or will not really look out for us, or there's nobody who's accountable or who will take responsibility for us. So my home is still 500 kilometers away or 600 kilometers away, or I need to be with my family, or maybe it was even in sometimes it was, harvest time and I need to go back home for harvesting wheat or so on. But I think one of the primary things being that you've deliberately kept people so unrooted in the city to be able to exploit them and not let them earn enough to even to be able to bring their families here or make a home here. So obviously they are in they are in a state of flux or in very precarious state is how you keep them. And so you put them in this extreme discomfort and danger also by packing so many people together. And I think people understand what's good for them and what's safe for them and what not. And they felt that if we fall ill here or if something happens to here, there's nobody here who will take responsibility, accountability, what will even happen to my body, and you have to let us go home. So this has been documented and some papers reported on it that, workers in Surat go on a rampage, construction workers in Gujarat did so and so, there was a workers riot in Karnataka. So a lot of this was beginning to put pressure on the government that, this is, it's making us look not in control. And so they were, in a way, they were forced to also restart. There was pressure on them from capitalists and businessmen that, our business is suffering, but also workers were making it impossible for them. The same people, the employers wanted workers to stay captive in a way in that area, but a lot of the workers were insisting. So though most of Indian workforce is not formally organized, we saw massive resistance of this sort as well. So all that was going on, and I felt like there's a need to also try and capture this and understand and document how are workers viewing this time. None of us have ever lived through something like this in our lifetimes, right? If normally you try to shut down work for 2 days, it just never happened in the world. And for the first time, production globally has been shut down for 2 months, 3 months. So in a way, it also shows that it didn't really lead to some great shortage of goods. Like nobody ran out of clothes, nobody ran out of shoes, right? That we are just, this production cycle is just maintained in a way that, no, this must go on. For the first time, this has stopped as well. So how are people viewing that? That normally if they try to stop work, it would never be tolerated. But here, suddenly everybody's been forced to sit down and stop working. And so how are they viewing that time, that disruption? There was a lot of discussion about who are essential workers. Suddenly everybody was waking up to who are essential workers. So what do those who are essential workers and are being described like this, what do they think of this? Is this a time which they are able to use to put forward something, demand something, question something, recreate something better? And how does it make us as workers view our own production, consumption, what's important in our own lives as well? So I did some of those conversations. I just call it like the great pause, that when we stopped, what did we think of, what did we do? So those were also so I interviewed, say, for example, some workers in Delhi who worked here 20 years. They were describing to me, like, on time, that he was saying that we were always told that to stay alive, we must keep working. And this is the first time where we were told that, no, to stay alive, you have to stop working. Some other thing that he mentioned was that, we think that we don't have enough. I mean, of course, people have very few savings and they got indebted, or they faced a lot of hardship. But he was just being thoughtful and reflective in this way that it also showed us that sometimes we guilt ourselves that, oh, I shouldn't take a day off because who knows what will happen and so on. And now what do? Now you've just suddenly lost control. So yeah, you had to deal with like sitting idle for 2 months. Then he was sharing things with me, like how his family lives back in Uttar Pradesh, that how he and his neighbor managed through the lockdown, where they would take turns to buy vegetables, that this is how they supported each other. And also he was saying other things. He actually shared a lot of things, like he was getting a little philosophical about it, on how that it also punctured a sense of self in all of us, that we think we are so grand, whereas it's made humans reflect what's really, how much are we in control or something, and so on. So he was sharing something like that. There were other workers, say, for example, I don't know if you have this in Pakistan, but there are some workers here who collect scrap and then they sell it to scrap dealers. So they collect it from households. And it's also actually quite pathetic that a lot of people charge even for that, giving that scrap to the scrap dealer. You'll charge for like, 1 cent. You pay me 1 cent from a very poor person, that, to even for the household, middle class or rich household, for them to hand over there. It's almost like they are doing recycling for you, or helping you to do the recycling, but you actually charge money from them for handing you over that scrap. So he shared a different experience where he felt very isolated or strange, that that people would treat him almost as an untouchable, that, oh, you are somebody who will be carrying this infection, just shut down their doors, or that you shouldn't be even seen around a house, or so on, or experiencing this kind of isolation and cruelty as well from people. Then there were other industrial workers so some of our biggest multinational corporations here, though they are at the topmost end of, you would think like it's a Japanese multinational corporation or a Korean multinational corporation. The area around Delhi, it has a substantive, in Haryana there's a substantive industrial belt. It's largely an automobile belt, but there are other electronic firms as well. So even the workers who worked for these multinational corporations shared experiences, like how the firm often hires people for just 7 months. Though you're doing essential work for the firm, you're hired on just these 7-month temporary contracts. So some of them were called in for this. Then initially they did share that they came in because they all had to stand 2 meters away. The assembly line had just slowed down. So
Right.
it was a bit relaxing in a way and all. Though then later on, what kind of safety measures were put in? Were they really adequate or not? Some of them shared how initially it was pretty stringent. Then 2 months later, even though coronavirus hadn't really gone anywhere, those were sort of diluted or made away with. Then some of the firms had made them download both a government application, same like our government's like obsession with apps to control everything and monitor everything. So they had made workers download these apps. If you did not have a smartphone and only had a feature phone, you were forced to buy a smartphone to enter the factory, and also made to download an app created by the factory, in which you had to feed your temperature. So it's not that you had to really fill your accurate temperature. They also told me after a while we figured out that we have to put this figure and not some other figure. But sometimes there were gate checks on that, that monitoring your checking your temperature when you enter the building. Those sort of things were done. At the same time, most of these workers work with no sick leave. If you So this company, which is the topmost multinational automobile firm in the country, the one which is getting majority of work done through these 7 month hires, it gives you 3 months of paid leave in 3 months, three days of paid leave in 3 months. Now, if you get COVID or if you get fever, this worker shared with me that though because he had already used up in that quarter of the year 3 days earlier, when I met him, he actually had fever. We had met in a park. We had already set up this meeting. When he came there, I realized he had high fever. He was not feeling comfortable. And I was even like, maybe we don't have to do this and all. But so what he shared was that he was still planning to go to work the next day and felt that he will have to hide it. He'll have to take just a painkiller or a fever suppressant and just lower his temperature, because if he takes 1 day off or tells them that he's not feeling well, then he'll be forced to take 5 days off, and it will lead to a deduction of $50 from his pay, 4,000 rupees of a pay of 21,000. The firm, so because it's the largest firm, it does pay better than some of the other people in the area, but it's still not that much compared to what the permanent workers are paid 3 times of this
Right,
amount.
and clearly couldn't afford to lose 4,000.
Yeah. So you were putting people in a state where if somebody fell ill, the companies would not offer either any diagnosis, the COVID test, any help with their treatment, even paid leave. That even if you fall ill, the first pressure on your head is that tomorrow if I do this, what will happen to me? The same was shared by a woman worker in an electronics making company. It makes parts of aeroplanes and these things, a Korean firm, that her husband fell ill with what seemed like COVID, and she lost pay for every day that she attended to him in the hospital. And this is somebody who's worked in that factory 9 years and is still treated as a temp worker, is paid 9,000 rupees in a month. So like $100 a month is what she's paid after 9 years of working there. And she said the contractor through which she's hired through maybe you're familiar with the system as well, like the contractor system, that though a lot of the firms show the workers hired through these multiple intermediaries, that the contractor whom though she's a direct worker of the company, she's shown hired through this other contractor. And the contractor had used the pandemic to say, we will not be providing you pay slips because the paper can, perpetuate, further the infection and so on. So, and then, so what I also found was, see, like initially I was mentioning this one worker had said how he who works in this metal workshop had found it a little bit also a bit of a rest time, or to, he was being a little more relaxed about it, that it was also a time to reflect and so on. This woman worker who I mentioned, who works in this electronic factory, because her husband had fallen ill, she felt she was under a lot of pressure. She was not called into work 3 months, but was only paid for 1 month. This is a multinational corporation who, despite a government order, a casual government order that no, you do need to pay your workers, had paid them 1 month of the 3 months that they were not called into work. That she felt so pressured that what she did was she started going into a garment clothes making factory, which again, those kind of exports and all were still, maybe some of these garment factories were open. And then she faced sexual harassment there. And so people had all kinds of experiences, and, that she had started probably putting herself even under greater strain or stress of that what's going to happen, are they going to call me back or not, and so on. So what I found was that people on one hand, people had come up with things like, oh, we figured how to beat this app, we know we can turn the Bluetooth off, things like that, and so on. There were a lot of instances of workers helping each other with whether it was money, sharing small amounts, food, sharing food, and so on things. There was also an initiative in North Delhi, it was called Workers Dhaba, where some of the workers who lived there along with students and all, they started preparing meals and so on. But what I mean, of course, overall it was a very given that government really had to step in and do more and all, which didn't really happen. But yeah, overall what I felt is that here a lot of the discussion or government measures or how employers treat you or how they make you choose between, like, either you have to come in and work and face this risk of getting COVID, of which we are not going to be there for you at all. You're not going to get any paid leave or health benefits from us at all. These are all things which are just, we are now seeing this a second time. A lot of this happened a second time, but a lot of these rules, norms, which are market based, whether it's vaccine and the pharmaceutical market, whether it is the wage labor market, whether it is, government failing to enforce through employers, that we are treating them as this is just some sacrosanct thing which cannot be redesigned. The private enterprise or, that's just sacrosanct, and it just, we cannot redesign. This is the time where people should be thinking or questioning more to redesign whether what are these buildings for, what are these resources for, but not so much of that going on.
The one thing that's going on is at least the rethinking of time and how the how work has been organized for workers, and why this is exploitative at its core, even when it doesn't need to be that way. And thank you so much for speaking about these small moments of solidarity, not just between informal workers, but like also there have been massive protests that have been held all over the world, actually, where workers have spoken about these, sorry, these terrible conditions in which they've been put in. Thank you so much for sharing these moments of solidarity, not just between informal workers as well, but also formal and informal workers, and international solidarity that's happened as well. I'm just wondering, given the crackdown on journalists, crackdown on health workers and farmers in India, has there been pushback against like these ways of organizing as well?
Yeah. So two things come to mind. One is government has largely responded to what it saw happen last year, which was this mass migration, forced migration of people, which has not been witnessed since partition. How they have responded to it largely is by saying, we will make another database of migrants. That this time we'll have a comprehensive database of workers. I kid you not. So that's going on, and workers were being asked that, oh, if when you leave villages, you should be putting down these details, and states will be asked to submit these kind of details. So basically, it may lead to further surveillance of workers because, like I mentioned last time when they agitated for the trains to be restarted and so on. it became unmanageable for the government, and it was a kind of response or resistance or by workers and the working class and the poor to government unilaterally deciding something. And in a way, this trying to get more information, who's who, database them, is this kind of a surveillance sort of, they'll couch it in welfare terms again, but it will largely be a surveillance project, I guess, is what is my concern. Another thing that comes to my mind is that, there's an industrial area about 40-50 kilometers from Delhi. It's called Sonipat. What we saw this was linked to the farmers' protest as well. The farmers' protest is on right now. It's just finished 6 months on the outskirts of Delhi, of North Delhi. The area where one of the biggest protest sites is, Singhu, is actually in the middle of a large industrial area called the Kundli industrial area. What happened in December was when these farmers, so November 26th were declared as the Central Union Strike Day or a day of national strike. And this time, often the strikes actually are not, though the numbers are projected as very large, the actual participation is not that big. But this time, a lot of the farmer unions joined this protest as well, and they reached Delhi's borders in large numbers. And though there is no, it's not a formal border, there's no physical demarcation, but Indian government sent in a lot of paramilitaries and bulldozers and equipment and whatnot to block them in any way possible. Anyway, they somehow these the workers, farm laborers, farmers, they outnumbered the paramilitaries and the police, and they erected tents and put together community kitchens and started staying here and organizing and asking for the 3 farm laws which liberalize agriculture further to be revoked. Around the same time, some workers in this area, the Kundli area, they also set up a tent there, and they later told us in interviews that they felt inspired and motivated, and they said that the way farmers are being treated in this fashion, similarly, we also want to bring the fact that labor laws in India have been diluted, also as part of the same protest. Some people here disagree, and there's some debate about this in India, because though Modi government has diluted labor laws or tried to amalgamate them as per the government, in a lot of instances diluting workers' formal protections, a lot of people point out actually a lot of these protections have been very diluted and are in practice not implemented since 20-30 years. Labor departments have been very weakened, and just that if they need 20 staff, they are given 5 people. If they need a vehicle to go make inspections, do inspections, they are not provided those kind of resources. So they are just kept very enfeebled anyway. So still these a lot of them who are they are from the Dalit caste. They themselves are from working class families. They had worked in factories. They are the people who organized some workers around Kundli area, and who they represent. They are in their early 20s. They've had some education or college education and so on. And after that, they found that there's really no place to go. You have to come and work in places like Kundli, where you have to work for 12 hours a day. You will be paid 8,000 or 9,000 rupees a month, which is like $100. And you will not be though the law says you will be paid overtime at double the rate, that's also denied to people. Women workers are sexually harassed. In a lot of places, even Sundays is not a guaranteed leave day for people. That even that day, if you take a day off, you will lose pay for taking a day off. So they've also seen the kind of extremely exploitative conditions. So they see that on one hand, you're either landless or you're very land poor, and now there's going to be further corporatization in agriculture and a takeover of agricultural land by industry to an even freer manner. On the other hand, when you come to factories to work, you will be treated in this fashion. And the government has also recently passed several measures making public education unaffordable for a lot of workers. So like they have hiked fees by 20 times and so on. So I think a lot of young people are also seeing, at least this group specifically has shared, that they see no avenues, or that it's just a clamp down from every direction. So they also put a tent there, and they said, we here are also setting up this a station here in the middle of the farm protest site, and whoever has been denied wages can come to us. They tried to address complaints of wage denial, that when workers had been overnight asked that, now lockdown, for 2 months don't come for work, or 3 months government announced lockdown, you were not working, why should you be paid for the days you did not come and work? It was not their role or responsibility or anything at all. And there was at least a formal order which was very poorly enforced, that wages ought to be paid. So the employers hadn't paid. Then in some cases, say the lockdown was announced on 24th March. They were denied pay for even the 20 days of March that they had worked. So there was a lot of cases of wage theft in this industrial area, and this group of people, it's called Mazdoor Adhikar Sangathan. A coalition for agitating for workers' rights. They said, if we approach labor departments and all, they do nothing. And when the worker goes alone back to the factory 3 months or 4 months later to say, hey, where's my 20 days of pay that I did work? The factory workers like, come tomorrow. No, it's the contractor's responsibility, not our problem, and so on, and turns them away. So what they started doing, they simply started trying to do this thing of that there is strength in numbers. 50 of us, of 100 of us will go and picket a factory gate. They started doing this. But how Haryana police responded was that first the industrial association sent these security people against them. So a lot of them hire private securities, which also have arms. So first, those were deployed against these workers' groups. Then the police picked up these people and put a number of cases. Two of the activists were made to undergo severe torture in the lockup. One of them, Nadeep Kaur, her case was also, she was in news a bit. At least it reached she got a little bit of international attention after this Canadian poet Rupi Kaur and some of the diaspora, Sikh diaspora, and Meena Harris, they tweeted about it, and then it got a little bit of attention that this Dalit labor organizer, she's 24, she was picked up, she was blamed, she was accused of attempt to murder and murderous attacks on policemen and so on. And she was sexually assaulted in lockup and then sent to prison. And the police then proceeded to deny the family even basic rights like seeing the police complain, what the charges against her, and so on. And then a couple of days later, another person, Shiv Kumar, who's also a Dalit labor organizer, he's been trying to organize workers in this area for 3 years. He has a disability in one eye. He was also picked up from the protest site by the police in plain clothes. Policemen went, picked him up, and tortured him in lockup, not showing his arrest on paper for 10 days. And they severely, later on, like 2-3 weeks later, when they managed to, some of the protest unions then approached some lawyers in Punjab who then tried to take this case. So his family was not allowed to meet him. His family was not informed even that he was being kept in the lockup 10 days. He was denied even use of his spectacles. He was like, they pulled out his nails. The kind of extreme torture they subjected this one labor worker, this labor organizer, who's a 24-year-old young man with the problem with a disability in one eye. They subjected him to extreme torture, like he's some, like some dangerous creature or what, and for doing what. So then there was a lot of mobilizing for them to be released as well. But still, now they've come out on bail after their family and they were put through extreme physical torture, mental harassment, sexual assault, and whatnot. But that's been one of the responses of Indian government through its hand, through the police arm and so on. And it's continuing. The cases on them continue to still be there. And Nadeep Kaur and Shiv Kumar have both talked about how this. And Haryana, the state where they're working, was one of the first states to dilute labor laws, and they were trying to respond to it. And the government is saying we don't want to have a formal mechanism of dispute resolution at all. You are actually leaving no space at all for people to have any collective bargaining, for them to be able to assert themselves in any way, organize in any way. You're literally just, you are abusing
workers. People are the majority, right, in India as well as in Pakistan. And there's a lot of anger against the government with, this not just complete abandonment, but also coercion and surveillance. This data thing, wow. Could you speak a bit about the election and how, that gives us a glimpse of how, people are fed up with, the way things are going?
Sarah, I mentioned that, but then I later thought that I don't really know, that much about Bengal or so on. It's hard to say. There has been, I think one of the biggest problems though, and whether workers can really express themselves or the working class can really express themselves through elections or votes or not, is that in India, you just don't get to vote because you migrate for work, and the place where you go and work, you're given no, you don't have a residence or so on. And so a lot of workers just do not interact with, I think the poorest workers have very little interface directly with the election and the electoral process and so on. Some families back home, that their families back home, they do take part in elections and they vote and so on. But I think this is also like a very deliberate and systematic cutting off of, you provide this kind of postal ballot and so on for soldiers and so on, but they don't do it for other categories of workers, and
Yes,
including like
absolutely.
construction
No, I
workers.
know. Thank you for pointing that out. Because, like if people can't be represented through votes, then we need insurgent solidarity. That is the call for the moment. Thank you so much, Anumeha, for speaking to us about your reporting about the condition with migrant workers during COVID in India, with the protests that have emerged and the channels of solidarity that have opened up between workers as well. Journalist to journalist, thank you so much. I learned a lot and I had a great time conversing with you.
I'm sorry, I don't know, if I felt like maybe. Anyway, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you too.